Welcome to the Berks Homes podcast, the business of building homes. My name's Brandon, and joining me today is Scott Hardie, our production manager of the South Central region. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing excellent. How are you today, Brandon?
Pretty good. We are in a different place today. We're not in the podcast studio. We are at Cumberland Preserve Estates in Carlisle. And this is one of our biggest communities, really. We've been building in here for how many years now?
It's going on 4 years.
4 years? Wow, that's awesome. Let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about who you are, Scott, and how you got into construction.
Well, first off, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
This is a beautiful day here in central Pennsylvania. One of our premier estate sections in our newest phase in Cumberland Preserve. See some construction going on behind us.
Yep.
As far as me, I grew up in New England originally.
Oh, wow.
So, big mountains, lots of ocean, lots of lakes. I served in the military, and I got into youth production stuff as far as working with adjudicated youth in group homes, both in New Hampshire and then here in Pennsylvania. Been here in Pennsylvania for about 24 years.
Okay.
Been working for Berks for almost 10. Great company to work for.
Yeah.
It's always a lesson here.
Yeah.
We do great work. We have a lot of pride in what we do. I've always been coaching. I have a lot of teachers in my family, so that's a natural kind of in my blood.
Yeah.
So I love to see that result from, the learning and the teaching and the coaching. So it's a natural position for me, which is a great opportunity.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's the day in the life of a production manager here at Berks Homes?
Well, it starts pretty early usually. Sometimes my phone can, ring at 5:30, texts, voicemails, phone calls, emails. Starts at home with a fresh cup of coffee, looking at the weather, what to expect for the day, reaching out to all my superintendents. We have 5 amazing superintendents here in our region, all very passionate about what they do, very competitive. They always want to be the best, have the greatest sites, have the best homes, really work well together. We have a great locker room.
Yeah.
So we all really help each other out. Somebody's on vacation, somebody's having a hard time, somebody's really busy, or somebody's not so busy. We always try to reach out and help each other. So touching base with those guys is my number one priority.
Sure.
Then it's trade, trade questions, trade concerns, trade schedules, land. We have an amazing land group here. So reaching out to them, figuring out issues with, sites coming up. Mm-hmm. Or sites in progress, trying to get through. As you see, we're in a newer phase here in Cumberland Preserve. So each development has its own unique issues. Yeah. As we go through the phase, there's always, communication is key, honestly. Either talking with the superintendents, the land guys and gals, or the trades, trying to keep the machine rolling, keeping it oiled. So basically, I feel like the middleman a lot of times where I'm talking with, our management, talking with our superintendents, or even driving by and reaching out to some of the customers, if they live here in the community that we're actively working in. So it's, I wear a lot of hats. Sure. Yep. Some of the hats are better than others, more comfortable, but never afraid to take a hat off and put another hat on. Okay. Awesome. So that's a day. It can be, 12 hours, it can be 6 hours. It all depends on, what happens.
What do you enjoy the most out of that?
I think just talking with people.
Yeah.
Humanity for me has always been very intriguing, how everybody works a little bit differently. Right. And being able to, talk effectively to get to, a certain place. Yeah. That's always been very intriguing to me. So I'm passionate about that.
That's awesome. How many communities are you actively overseeing right now, and which one is the most intense and why?
Yeah, let's see. So we have developments, 10 different developments. Yep. In a pretty large geographical area. We go from, north of Harrisburg, looking west, we're out into Duncannon and Halifax, which are, out in the country, right up in the mountains, as they say here in Pennsylvania. Again, I laugh because New Hampshire and Pennsylvania, they don't have mountains here.
Sure. Yeah.
And then south, we're all the way down into Waynesboro, Fayetteville, Chambersburg. And then looking east, we're out into York, East York, South York, and then the Harrisburg region, right? Yep. We're all around the Harrisburg area. Yep. So, that geographical area reaches out. So lots of different places, lots of different customers. Customer base is wide and definitely diverse. We also, one of our largest growing areas has been our on your lots or on your land.
Okay.
When a buyer comes to us and says, hey, I have a plot of land and I'd love to build one of your homes. Or, we find a lot in an area or in a neighborhood, in a pre-existing neighborhood that, we think will be a good fit for us.
Yeah.
So there's about 10 of those as well. So
Okay.
between the developments and the, off-site work, it's very diverse, right?
Sure.
We have lots of townhouses,
Yep.
singles, single family homes like you see behind us, and then, duplexes.
Yep.
So we do a wide range of building in a wide range of diverse neighborhoods and locations.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to see those differences. You're not looking at one thing over and over and over again.
Yeah. There's a lot of single family homes here, and then way over there is a lot of duplexes.
Duplexes.
Very interesting.
Right. So this is one of those very diverse communities where you have, those type of buyers that are in the same space. In a beautiful location, very centralized.
Yeah.
You have the turnpike right here, the highways nearby, but then right behind us, you have the mountains and the country and cornfields that we can see.
Yep.
So it's a great place to be.
Yeah. So how do you maintain a consistent Berks Homes experience across communities that are all in different stages, different locations, and different conditions?
I think that starts with expectations.
Yeah.
And that has to do with management down and teaching what the Berks standard is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to never forget that, because sometimes, as I was a superintendent here and in other places, you get stuck in a rut of just, you have your horse blinders on and you're just building. You're just building a box.
Yeah.
And we always have to understand that these boxes, these homes that we're building are for people and families. And I think keeping the high expectation of professionalism, being gentle, being respectful, keeping a clean, organized job site and community. When somebody drives through either a neighborhood or buy one of our on your land homes, it's pretty clear that we take a lot of pride in not just the land, but the product that we're delivering to somebody and their family.
Yeah.
So I think that's super important about expectations.
Okay.
That's where it starts.
Sure. Yeah.
There's, we could go on and on and on about, lessons and learning and training. I take a lot of credit for somebody's success, but I also take a lot of credit for somebody's failure, knowing that I probably could have done or helped in another way to get to, again, keeping up that Berks standard, which has always been super important to me and taught and trained to me.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite stage of the home?
I think right before it starts to dig.
Yeah.
It's that, especially when it's not a spec, right? When there's a family involved and I've met that family, as a superintendent, you sit down with them and you get to know them and you start your relationship with them. They start to kind of understand where you're coming from and where your passion is. And then again, at the end, when the house is all cleaned and the water's on and the lights on and you see their smile and their joy and you hand them a key to something that you've spent months with your passion and your drive to hand them something that they're going to enjoy and spend and grow. Those are my definitely my two favorite times during the home build.
Awesome. So how do you build loyalty with trade partners? What does Berks Homes do that makes them want to show up for you?
So as a superintendent, you are their partner. You are their scheduler. You make sure that they have everything they need. And that starts with clear communication in the beginning as far as the schedule, when you expect them to be there, how long you expect it to take, delivering them a clean, organized job site, whether it's them digging the yard, right? Making sure that it's ready to dig, all the way to it's ready to paint, it's ready to clean. So making sure that it's ready for them. That's the most important thing. And if you do that, a lot of times you may not be able to talk very eloquently, or you may not show up all the time. You may not be the friendliest of people, but if you have a clean, ready, prepared job site, subcontractors, our trade partners really love that it's just ready to go, and they don't have to worry about that or come back because it's not.
Sure.
So that's where it begins. But I have, relationships with a lot of these trade partners that we use that they've been with Berks for years, some of them 20 or 30 years. And there's a good reason for that.
Yeah.
Because that was trained and taught and shown to me that that's why that's important. Is, a good trade partner, it's all about communication. You know their family. You may have gone over there for a barbecue. You may go out on the boat with them. It's something that it's shared. So you share in the success and you also share in the failure. So making sure if there's a challenge with materials or the delivery of a material, or something happens like a natural disaster, you're working together as a team to make sure that you make it right. Because we all know in construction, it never goes 100% the right way.
Right.
And I always talk to my guys about putting money in the bank. And what I mean by that is making sure that you're flexible with your job and your schedule as they need it to be. Because there's going to be a point where you need them to be flexible.
Right.
And having money in the bank to trade a little bit here and there, at some point you're going to need them to come down the road, across the county, or even down the street to help you out in a time of need when you need something done in the next 20 minutes. And they just load up their truck and show up, and they're not mad, they're not aggravated because you've put money in the bank to trade with them. And so that I've tried to kind of teach that to my guys, that that's why the relationship with all these folks is really important, because it's a relationship that you want to trust them as much as they need to trust you.
Sure. What does it mean to you personally that families are going to live in homes your team builds?
I think that's what drives me, especially as a young builder. I worked with remodeling, and then I got into ADA, compliance, and into, fixing homes so somebody could come home in a wheelchair. And I think that's where I started to learn that, a hammer and a saw are just a tool to get to freedom, independence. And now, as a superintendent working with homes, working with buyers, it's super important because in most cases, this is the largest, most stressful example of financial, liability. Right. They might be moving from out of state. We've had customers, I've done my orientation over the phone as they drive from Oregon.
Wow.
With their 4 kids in the back screaming, but they're smiling.
Yeah.
And when they show up, greet them here, settle them in. It's important because, you're dealing with humans.
Yeah. Right.
And feelings and challenges and families. And it's not just them, it's their parents or their cousins or their uncles or, and they all want to come see.
Right.
It doesn't matter what culture you're from. It's important because you're buying a home, you're moving into a home to grow, your family. And you have to remember that in the process.
Sure.
Again, it's not just a box.
Yeah.
You're building somebody's future, somebody's dream. And even if they're buying a townhouse to rent, they're investing in their future.
Yeah, of course.
And so you can't forget about that.
Yeah.
So I love working with customers who show that joy and show that anguish and frustration, and working through it and getting them to the end where, they're moving in, and always making sure you drive by slowly, roll the window down and say, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
Yeah.
Just wanted to check in. How's it going?
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do?" It's super important.
Do any of them reach out just to just have a conversation with you?
Last week I went out to lunch with a couple and their baby.
Yeah.
I built their house 6 years ago.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
going to family functions and barbecues and seeing them out.
Yeah, right.
It's like, I was a coach, when my kids were little, coaching them through sports and being connected to the community. And you feel that way when you see them out and around in the community or out at the grocery store. You're not just Coach, Mr. Hardie. Their kids know you as Uncle Scott. That's huge.
Yeah.
And if you can connect like that to half of your buyers, I think you've been successful.
Oh, yeah. Is there a system or a rhythm you've built for yourself to stay on top of everything?
So I think learning from my mentors taught me that writing it down is super important.
Okay. Yep.
I had a manager once that said, if it's not written down, it doesn't and won't happen, and didn't happen. And I think it's important to keep reminding yourself, even if you cross something off a list. I don't cross it fully off the list or erase it, or I can't read it over.
Oh, yeah.
To show myself I've gone through it. I have a notebook where, I'm probably halfway through it. And sometimes I go back to the beginning. It's like looking at a photo album.
Sure.
And showing that there's days that were terrible. I get on my phone and there's 20 phone calls and 30 text messages. And then there's some days where there's 2 text messages and a couple of emails. And those are the days that you can catch up.
Yeah.
But writing it down, communicating your expectations and getting it done today and not waiting for it for till tomorrow, those are the things that I think I base all my training and teaching and learning on. But keeping track of what you need to do today and what's coming up. Starting off in the morning like I do with a cup of coffee and a yogurt, and the first thing I look at is the weather. I might look at the news, check on the sports scores from last night because I fell asleep. But looking at what do I expect today, and then what do I look at this week, and then what's coming up.
Okay.
And not keeping that to myself, sharing it with my family, sharing it with all my supers, sharing it with the trades.
Okay.
Our trade partners want to stay with us for a reason. And that's because we let them know what's coming up. How are we doing as a company?
Yeah.
How's the market doing? What can they expect from us? Because getting blindsided, whether it's from my son, from my wife, from one of my superintendents, from my manager, or from one of my trades, none of us like to be there. So it's important to be open and honest. And I think it's really important. So I think writing it down has been huge for me.
Okay.
Keeping track of it, touching base, and showing people what's coming up. What's the expectation of not just today, but for tomorrow. And I think that keeps me on track and keeps me motivated to kind of keep going and learning. You always got to learn.
Yeah, of course.
So those are the important bases that I use every day.
So what's the biggest challenge of managing multiple communities at the same time versus focusing on just one?
Yeah, having one community, I had that luxury at points in my career where you leave your house and you're going to a community and you may need to go to Home Depot or Lowe's to pick something up, but you're coming and going from one space. And that's nice in some aspects, right? You're not driving around a lot. The con to that is you're not seeing other things from other people's perspectives.
Okay.
We have superintendents that are in 3 or 4 different communities and multiple lot sites, like a select lot or an on your land. And that's a challenge just because of windshield time, right? Time behind the wheel, going from location to location is obviously one of the largest challenges there. But the real challenge, the reality is each piece of property, whether it's here in a development, each lot is completely different than the next. And they offer you different challenges to both learn and to deal with. And sometimes it's an expectation of something coming up or something that you have to deal with right now to keep the project moving smoothly. So for me, dealing with 10 different developments and 9 or 10 different, on your land select lots is obviously drive time, managing the different personalities, right? With my superintendents, the buyers, the sales agents. We have an amazing sales team letting us know what type of buyer that we're getting, so that we can kind of set those expectations. And then our trades, right? Because we're so diverse as far as geographic location, we're using different trade bases, and they all work a little bit differently, and they all have a different set of expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think in the combination of the property, the lot, the people, right? Whether it's the buyer, the superintendent, because they all have their own personality and how they work and how they're successful, to the trade and what that offers. So sometimes it's just distance, and sometimes it's personal challenges, right? And those are all things that if you're not learning every day, you're really not doing your job effectively.
Right.
So that's the biggest challenge, I think. If I were to point one out, I think the obvious thing is the property itself.
Yeah.
You know, if there weren't any people involved, it would still be a big challenge.
Yeah.
Because, you know, how we're sitting here, you know, there's a big drop off here. You could be dealing with something on top of a mountain. You could be dealing with something super flat. We got to get water away. You know, there's always a challenge with the property, and doesn't matter who I'm dealing with. That's what we have to figure out first before we even start digging.
Gotcha.
Those are all fun to deal with for sure.
Thanks for joining me today, Scott. This was awesome. You gave us a lot of good, valuable information, and this is pretty cool just to kind of do a different type of scenery for the podcasts and make this a little bit more interactive, and, you know, just try to take this to like next level. This was great. So thanks for joining me today. Do you have anything else for the fans?
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, learning, hopefully somebody learned something. I know I did.
Yeah.
This is a great experience. Thank you, Owen Mock, for, you know, hosting in his amazing development here at Cumberland Preserve. He wasn't sure where we were going to be, so he spent the morning cleaning one of the houses for us. So shout out to Owen for that excellent work. He's
like
one of our
house?
Superstars. No, the house that they're siding. He wasn't expecting the siders to show up this morning. So
okay, I got you.
He set up a little spot for us in there. But yeah, it's amazing to have the team that I have.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, this is the easy part.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. Awesome. Thanks again, Scott. All right.
Have a great day.
See ya.